All right, we're live. Tonight we're getting into a debate that is of the utmost importance in my world, and I think in the world at large. Chemical enlightenment, chemical gnosis, illumination through psychedelics. Is it legitimate? Part of what inspired this topic tonight is that a couple of weeks ago I did or I participated in a space on X, which is like a Discord voice chat sort of affair. And in fact, it was hosted by Northern Lights there. And there was one individual that was very obviously of the opinion that psychedelics were more dangerous than it's worth, that the attainment of knowledge through this means was not necessarily legitimate, and a lot of the things that he said and the way that he phrased a lot of his arguments really made it clear to me that we have a lot of work to do in terms of reforming the perception of psychedelics. It's not really a matter of opinion whether they're efficacious as therapeutic agents at this point. The research is remarkable, and it is unarguable. When it comes to addiction and PTSD and MDMA, even for marriage salvaging, 85% is the average number in terms of how much more effective than conventional therapies psychedelics tend to be. So for smoking cessation, psilocybin, the study at Johns Hopkins, 85%. And they did check back in with these people 5 years later. PTSD, the same number. So, that's not really... There are still people that scoff and have trouble accepting this, But the idea that there's an actual path to enlightenment represented by psychedelic use is something that I think is a lot more contentious in the spiritual community. And Terrence Mckenna famously quipped many years ago that, there's this crowd that pushes the idea that you can get a lot higher with drugs than without them. I wouldn't use the word drugs, he did. And he said, I've never bought into that. And the literature doesn't represent that. And, my personal experience doesn't represent that. Or doesn't present that to me, But I have to frame that context is everything. If psychedelics are taken without the intention to elevate consciousness, without the intention to heal, then they can be disastrous. And even when the intention is correct, if the person doesn't have a protocol defined for themselves that assist them in their ability to think critically, right? Like the more of the universe you are perceiving, the more information you have to filter through, the more you're aware of, the more nonsense you're going to have to dig through to separate the wheat from the chaff, So it is true that once you open your mind to all of these possibilities, there's all sorts of spiritual woo and nonsense. There's all sorts of misdirection in the form of misguided New Age authors, people that actually are just fabricating stuff in order to make money to sell books. It's really a minefield trying to navigate the territory of spirituality in an environment where the profit motive has entered into the stage, into the arena. And so the way that I kind of think about this, because we see changes in people that are positive from psychedelic therapy, ayahuasca experiences, mushroom experiences, LSD. People have a tendency to become kinder, to become more fascinated with the mysteries, to be more receptive to the beauty, and to ask questions in regards to assumptions that we make culturally, But why is that really? And when it comes to addiction and other psychological aberrations that have to be corrected, that psychedelics are employed for, There's a lot of talk about neuroplasticity and neurogenesis. So the brain is building itself faster. The neural pathways are better able to reconfigure themselves. But that doesn't really offer a real explanation for why these changes occur and why they're so consistent. The neuroplasticity and neurogenesis tells us why the brain is able to retain these changes, but it doesn't tell us where they come from. And, I've been a lifelong student of the mysteries, and that sort of study of occult science that integrates the earthly sciences with a sort of metaphysical, integration where the two things are not seen as separate, that your learning and your development and your expansion of your mind and the enrichment of your intellect is inextricably intertwined with your spiritual development. And so there are processes, and there is a technical strategy. There's a protocol for this kind of development. And one of the things that you learn from these mystery traditions, or one of the ideas that's presented that I believe is correct, is that there is actually sort of a moral law that is a structural component of the universe. It's something that is created by the universal laws in the same way that gravity is generated. And when you suspend the individual filter, the absurdly narrow vantage point of a single ego from which we attempt to make sense of the universe, right? When you suspend that, you have a more holistic experience of what nature is, what the universe is, and your place within it. And part of that is a recognition of patterns. And that information, which is really what those patterns represent, is understood by the subconscious mind far more than it is the conscious mind. And so whether you're consciously aware of it or not, you are interfacing with the wiring under the board. You're getting a first-hand download of the truth behind the universe. And this can be thought of in a lot of ways, but when, mystics talk about the universe being made fundamentally of love, I think we anthropomorphize that a bit too much. What it really means is that there is a positive gestalt. There is a certain current of energy that is generating and creating, and it has as part of its directive the preservation of life and the creation and concrescence of novelty. And when you align yourself with that flow and you detach yourself from personal desires and from the dissonance that's created by the influence of culture, in a very toxic paradigm, when these dissonance patterns are removed and you are able to objectively interface with the energies and the structures and the patterns that underlie the universe, you become, in a very organic way, part of that flow. And while it's true, as D.T. Suzuki, the famous Zen master, once said, he took LSD. And when he was asked about the experience, he said, I'm not going to say that these aren't the real secrets that are revealed to people after decades of meditating. They are. But it's like storming heaven and stealing secrets by violence. And what he meant by that is that if you have not developed the discipline, the willpower, the objectivity, the critical thinking skills, the whole, bag of tools that you need to really, truly navigate a greater mind, a wider perspective, acquiring more power in the absence of wisdom can be extremely destructive. I've experienced that myself. So it's not enough just to have the experience. The experience must be fortified and bolstered by rigid, structured determination to create for yourself a method to make investitures of these lofty insights and to ground this new new form of being in something concrete and manageable and navigable and informed by traditionally centuries of accrued wisdom. And that's another issue in our society. Earlier I was talking about how we have this inundation of questionable spiritual protocols and beliefs because the profit motive has entered into the scenario. And historically, in the mystery tradition, which is kind of my main lineage, it's not exactly hierarchy, but there were people who were there to inform and to guide, and there was a structure that had been passed down, and the same is true of South American shamanism, that had been passed down to people to protect them and to help them to integrate these experiences and to make something meaningful of them. The fact that we don't necessarily have a protocol, we don't have shamans in our communities, and if we do, we're generally not sure of their veracity. It's a sticky situation, and it's like if you are riding a bicycle and you crash, you might skin your leg, maybe break an arm at worst. But if you're driving in a Lamborghini at 200 miles an hour and you hit a brick wall, you're going to die. These psychedelics as catalysts that's a perfect, allegory for how it all goes down. Let me check in with the chat real quick. Have I ever taken datura, aka Jimson weed? Yes. The first time I took it, I was a teenager, and I knew it was a bad idea, but I was curious, and there was Jimson weed down the street from my house, and I think I ate half a seed pod, and I think it permanently damaged my vision, and it made me so dehydrated I couldn't swallow water. I went down, I was only 16, but I could drink at the local bars, and I went down to the bar to try to get a beer because I thought maybe that would help. It's not good. It's not good. But at the current juncture, I actually take Brumansia, Toei, Floripondia. It's got all kinds of names. It has the same alkaloids as datura, but datura, the flowers are up, and Brumansia, they're down. That's really the only distinction. And also the ratio of the chemicals is different. And they're not classical psychedelics; they're deliriants, and also very dangerous. So it's not not something to take lightly. But I actually use it for insomnia and inflammation. I have chronic inflammation, and it is amazing for that. But these plants cause true hallucinations. So one night when I first arrived in Peru, I knew it was stronger here, but it was stronger than. Even though I backed off what I would take in Ecuador for insomnia, it was still too much a little bit. And, throughout the night, I was waking up and like my partner was there, and she wasn't really there, but she looked just as real as if she was, except that she was putting coins in my hand that were falling right through my hand. So I knew something was weird. And then later there was like a professor that had a Egyptian symbol on the wall, and he had a stick, and he was like explaining all the symbolism and whatnot. But it looked just as real as, this camera and computer in front of me. So, yeah, I've taken those things, and definitely not something to be taken lightly. So where were we at on this this journey, this mission of sorting out the legitimacy of entheogenic gnosis? It's also even possible that all spiritual traditions were catalyzed by some sort of psychoactive plant. This is a theory that's pretty widespread, and certainly in the mystery traditions, which is the source of Christianity and Islam and Judaism, they had a psychedelic catalyst that was employed. So it's kind of a funny argument to me to say that, these things may not be legitimate, because it's very likely that we wouldn't even have that aspect of our being if it wasn't for these catalysts in the first place. Another issue that people like to cite is that we have a lot of instances of ego inflation from people that take psychedelics. You have ayahuasca shamans that have been drinking it for years and years and years, and they'll turn dark and deceptive, and their egos will explode, and all sorts of terrible things happen. And, people say, isn't that proof that these things don't actually have the enlightening capacity that a lot of people claim? And my argument in regards to that is that this goes back to the context problem, that we don't have a system of hierarchy like we did in the mysteries. We don't have the village shaman to give people guidance and to check them. Once someone starts going out of, gets out of sync, out of homeostasis, there's not really anyone around, particularly if they're at the top of their particular totem pole, to reel them in and to check them. And so these things become big problems, So we have to be honest and realistic. Nothing is perfect. There's no magic pill that is going to liberate people and bring enlightenment and resolve all these traumas without the proper context, without the proper protocol, And I would also suggest that in a lot of cases, this ego inflation is actually necessary for that individual. The medicine catalyzes this because the person must go through this humbling process in order for the work to continue, for their individuation and their self-realization to manifest. There is this period of apparently destructive ego inflation. But on the other side of that, oftentimes it's, in retrospect, exactly what needed to happen for that individual. Another thing that I would point out is that, if it was 200 years ago, if we weren't on the brink of World War III, if the Earth wasn't in danger of, environmental and cultural collapse, then perhaps it would be more feasible for us to go and sit in caves and meditate and be aesthetics and fast and do all these things for decades in order to maybe achieve enlightenment through breath work. We do not have that, what's the word? Liberty at the moment. Our backs are up against the wall. We're bombarded with propaganda. There is a tremendous amount of energy being put into fomenting division and discontent. The enemy is upon us, and we have a very, very small window available to us to achieve a collective gnosis. Because, this might sound dramatic, but I believe 100% that the only possible resolution to the chaostrophe that we're enduring in this moment is a collective awakening. That is the only answer. And this situation since 2020, where we've had all of these things like the pandemic and these elections that are so divisive, the degree of conditioning and indoctrination that is become apparent, especially by going on X. I mean, it's completely insane. You see how deeply rooted these things are and how difficult it is once this cognitive dissonance is thoroughly rooted in people to loosen the strictures on the mind. It is a terrifically challenging circumstance. There's a great quote from the Phoenix de Comte, who I don't even know who he was. It's one of the people Aleister Crowley claimed to be a reincarnation of. But he said the absolute rule of the state shall be a function of the absolute liberty of the individual will. And, that sounds paradoxical and whatnot, but the reality is you can replace capitalism with socialism. You can replace socialism with communism. You can, whatever ism, schism game you want to apply, it's not going to resolve anything until the consciousness of the people is changed. That's the actual reality of it. All of these systems are going to be subject to abuse as long as people are still duped by the system. And the only thing that I've seen that consistently, it's not guaranteed, but that consistently can dissolve the mind-forged manacles of culture are psychedelics in the right context. And, with what we know about entrainment, and there have actually been a number of experiments recently. Robert Seffer, I think is the name, has a great channel where he talks about a lot of this stuff. People, and it's actually a major advance in the parapsychological research department, because apparently consciousness during dreams being linked with people is much more reliably provable, But all that aside, the point being that we know that when people change their consciousness, that all of the other minds in the net of being, the electromagnetic field that unites all of our minds, that we have the ability to influence people indirectly, right? So the promise and potential of liberating our own minds, and in the course of that, liberating the minds of others, is basically guaranteed. The caveat is that it must be actual truth that is attained by these people. A change of consciousness from matrix mind to another false narrative is not progress. Falsehood is not liberation. And so that's kind of the bullet point of this presentation here. And part of the reason that I'm offering this is that I see intellectual laziness is still a massive problem, even among people that have taken the first steps towards Gnosis and illumination and enlightenment. People don't really want to do the tedious work. They and you shouldn't really see it as tedious. For me, studying mathematics, philosophy, biology, electromagnetism, it's an adventure. It is a joy. It is a privilege. It is a blessing, And it is through that type of education that you are able to take psychedelics and then navigate the expanded arena that you now find yourself trying to come to terms with. This grounded earthly education and enrichment of intellect is what gives you the capacity and the tools to make investitures of your lofty insights and gains. Without that, you're just going to become a muddle-headed mystic with wind whistling through your ears. That is the solution. Somebody's mentioning Graham Hancock there. Yeah, I don't know if you guys all saw my have I ever smoked Syrian rue? I've never heard of anyone doing that. What is the Islamic take for psychedelic religious ceremonies? I have no idea, but I would assume it's probably considered completely off limits. All right, and we're always open to questions and comments. Also, please hit the like button, share, subscribe, consider becoming a patron. We are demonetized, so I rely on the community. Also, we have a few spots still open at our retreat in November and December and May in the jungle. So shoot me an email if you're interested in any of that stuff. I know there was another talking point here that's that's kind of evading me. Yeah, I mean, this subject of, fortifying your intellect is the most important thing that I see being neglected. The critical thinking capacity. We have to be humble. I see the mistake that a lot of people make, and it's an honest mistake. It makes sense. But they think that if they have escaped the mainstream narratives and they have discovered that there's a lot of BS and that it's deceptive and that the machine is absolutely evil and all of this stuff. But the reality is, if you have not created a more efficacious mechanism in your intellect for critical thinking and reasoning, and you jump into another false narrative, you're in the same position, you're just in another box. And so, this is the key to accelerating this process. Yeah, the thing that I've been trying to focus on for the last year or so, because it did really start to get to me when I realized how entrenched people are in the traps of culture and politics and religion and whatnot. I always knew it was bad, but in recent years it's become glaringly obvious. And then we have all these existential threats and all of this craziness. You know, things are in balance. So as all of this chaos and lunacy and ignorance increases, there is an equal and opposite movement in the other direction. And so we have more people that are free of the traps of culture. We have more people than ever that are primed to release themselves from the bondage of their indoctrination. It's a crazy thing, but the reality is that we are immersed in an interplay of equal and opposite antinomies. And the more potential there is in any moment, the more existential threat there's going to be. And so even the chaos and the threats and the, uncertainty, all of these things, if you are wise, if you walk with knowledge wisely, these are all prima materia that you have the opportunity to transmute into fuel to compel us to higher vantage points than have ever been seen before in human history. It is true that the obstacles in front of us are also more fortified and threatening and imminent, than probably ever before in human history. But that is how the game works. That is how it's structured. This is something that we cannot evade and we cannot escape. But we can actually use it to our advantage if our wisdom is great enough, if our willpower and discipline is great enough. We are at the climax, the eschaton of human history. And whether we will see the mushroom of Oppenheimer or that of Leary and McKenna is up to us. It is a tremendous burden of responsibility, but we have the tools, we have the capacity, hopefully we have the drive, we have the love, we have the determination, and we have the time. Because, we have the election coming up in 2 weeks. There's a good chance that, more of a certainty that whatever happens at that election, within a week or so, it's going to be much easier for us to gauge what the scenario is, exactly what the conditions are that we're going to have to be navigating. Because until that happens in the United States, there's a lot that's really up in the air. And until we collapse that probability wave and get an actuality, it's really difficult to assess like the level of threat and chaos that is about to emerge in society. And it is all connected globally. So, it's... I'm ready for it to be over. I'm really ready for it to be over. I have no doubt that there's going to be some major event that we are going to have to confront, and the shock waves are probably going to be intense, but I'm not going to speculate about that, and I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just here tonight to try to offer what I can in the arena of sensibility, positivity, and hopefully we will be pleasantly surprised. He says you can't receive gnosis from intuition. It needs to come from experience. Well, it's actually both. The experience and the work that you put into developing your mind definitely leads to an enhanced intuition. And it actually gets to the point where the symmetries that you've experienced in your life that are integrated into everything. They're a structural part of the universe. They are also part of this universal mind. And the dialogue that is developed becomes like an intuitive experience. It's a very different way of experiencing reality when you realize that it is not blind, random chance that gives rise to all of this complexity. And the most wonderful element of it, perhaps, is that it becomes so much more interactive and so much more enriching. And the absence of that is really what has led mankind down such a horrendous rabbit hole. The crisis of purpose, that detachment from the living universe is death. And so the people that have not had this experience and that have shut out the light, basically, by really fully committing and limiting themselves to an absolutely deterministic material universe, are really basically the walking dead. And psychedelics are a way for that light to penetrate and to fracture that structure that has impeded the life, the experience of a living universe, And our prime directive, is to use that light to burn the tether from the overseers and become our own Prometheus. There is no other choice. And the result of it is extraordinary and enriching. And, I personally can't imagine living a life devoid of that awareness. It does not seem worthwhile to me. I don't know how people do it. I don't know why they do it. I was thinking today that the people that absolutely believe there's no possibility of an afterlife, how is an afterlife less probable than this life? There's actually no logic there. No reason. The extent to which people are manifestations of conditioning that are basically completely on autopilot, once you really realize the extent of it, it is mind-blowing. And the triggers that could free them from that are so numerous and so ubiquitous throughout our experience that the machine has to put almost all of its energy into maintaining that illusion and keeping people embedded in it, because it would take so little to undo the illusion. The veil is paper thin at this point, and it would take much more than a gust of wind to blow over the whole house of cards. We are in that moment, because subconsciously everyone knows the truth to some extent. And I think the existential threat right now could be enough in and of itself to catalyze the change in people. Some part of them is going to realize that if they don't make this change and find the courage to have the revelation, then, it's game over. And it should be. It is a catastrophic waste of energy to have a planet sustaining life that, takes for granted its ability to lift an eye to heaven, high is the way, but all eyes are upon the ground. This whole time period is like a fucking bad TV show. It is. It's remarkable. I mean, it's absolutely mind-blowing to see, people idolizing Donald Trump, who has spent his entire life ripping off blue-collar people, and then Kamala Harris being touted as a champion of justice when she, once said of an innocent man on death row that he should remain on death row. He had been on death row for 18 years at this point. He should remain on death row because he filed his papers late. And she kept people in prison illegally past their release date, even though Supreme Court ordered her to release them because they were doing free labor for the state or cheap labor for the state. All of this stuff is deliberate. They are engendering and promulgating and propagating as much cognitive dissonance in people as humanly possible, because that is the most effective propaganda tool to keep people trapped. And when you have to maintain cognitive dissonance, when these things are rooted, when that cognitive dissonance is challenged, it triggers your fight or flight, because our cognitive dissonance is rooted into our survival mechanism. And so it's a tremendously difficult thing to override and to get around. You know, it really is bizarre to the point of being surreal. You know, it's almost like a bad dream. But it's always darkest before the dawn. And as I'm always saying, you know, chaos always precedes order. This moment of discord and dissonance is a prerequisite to the emergence of some better order of being. You know, it has to happen that way. And so rather than looking out at it all and thinking, man, we are doomed, I just kind of think from a magician's point of view, this is exactly the scenario that we need to birth a new consciousness and a new way of being. And if we're successful, the fruits of our labors are beyond our wildest dreams. You know, if we were able to constrain the emergent technology in an enlightened way, and we were able to minimize human suffering and minimize the wasted human potential, we could truly have the most extraordinary living dream, that not even that you can imagine, beyond what you can imagine. And that's what's at stake here. So self-discovery, enrichment of the intellect, commitment to achieving transcendental states, flow state activities, you know, and lots of discernment in your interactions with the people around you in this moment. So I have to do a client call now, and I would love to keep this going, but I'll be back tomorrow with, actually, I think we're going to talk about Bufo, the toad, as a marital aid. I read somewhere that people use it in lower doses as a aphrodisiac, sort of, but also as a way to deepen the connection during coitus. And I experimented with this, and I'm going to have to give it a 10. So we'll chat about that tomorrow. Thank you guys so much for spending this time with me. Please hit the like button, share, subscribe, and consider becoming a patron. I'm out.